Now, Bahrain has gone ahead with the execution of two men convicted on terrorism charges, despite international concern about the fairness of the trial. UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings, Agnes Callamard, had called on Bahrain not to carry out the death sentences handed to Shia activists Ali al-Arab and Ahmed al-Malali. They were sentenced over the killing of a policeman after a mass trial of 56 men last year. Amnesty International says the men were beaten and tortured in custody to obtain confessions. Well, let's get more on this. We're joined now by Sam Walton, human rights activist who specialises on Bahrain, and he's joining us live from London. Very good to have you with us on AlJazeera. The charges against the men are the most serious of charges: terrorism, murder, and human rights organisations, even the United Nations, are saying they didn't receive a fair trial. Why not?
Well, there can be no fair trial under Bahrain's current judicial system, which it would be generous to describe it as a kangaroo court. But also we've seen credible reports of torture. We've heard from the families of the men that one of them was shot during his arrest, and those bullets were only removed 23 days later. When they came to visit him in prison, he was in a wheelchair. His toenails had all been removed. He couldn't walk, and he said they'd used electroshock batons on him and beaten him severely and forced him to sign a confession. So these trials are, frankly, the least credible trials I can think of.
Those are certainly disturbing reports. Are these cases representative, though, of a wider issue around unfair trials and executions in Bahrain? Have things become worse since the protests in 2011, when authorities cracked down on Shia-led protests demanding political reform?
Absolutely. I mean, this really is par for the course in Bahrain. We saw 3 executions a couple of years ago in 2017 in a very similar pattern, and we're seeing these executions now. A lot of that has been linked to, in fact, the Bahrain embassy in the United States linked the executions explicitly to Donald Trump resuming executions in America. And I think it's very important to link the timing of these executions to the recess in the UK, EU and US parliamentary bodies, because Bahrain does not want scrutiny of its executions. So it's good to talk about it on the media. And
I was just going to ask, so if they're not going to come under pressure from, say, the United States, can we expect international pressure from other countries, especially Britain, where you are, in regards to Bahrain's human rights situation?
Well, I think that's a very important question to ask about the international pressure, because Britain especially is Bahrain's old colonial power. King Hamad of Bahrain likes to think of Bahrain as still part of the British Empire, and we've seen Britain continually trying to find ways to not justify, but false methods of accountability for torture. So, for instance, putting cameras in Bahraini prisons, which will stop torture apparently, but of course the torture simply takes place round the corner from where those cameras are. And in fact, this week in the House of Lords in Britain, we heard Lord Collins of Highbury say the fact that the verdict of the UN Committee of Torture was that UK-funded human rights oversight bodies in Bahrain are not effective. UK taxpayers' money is being used and leading to more executions in Bahrain than ever before. And I think it's just a condemnation of Britain. We've seen Labour politicians, Lib Dem politicians come out this week and condemn these executions, but we have seen a deafening silence from Boris Johnson's new government and a complete unwillingness to protect their human rights.
Do you think that more international pressure and scrutiny would make a difference, though?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason they're doing this now is because they're worried about the scrutiny from the parliament. So, we are in a position where Bahrain does not like to be seen as a torturing state and likes to get its executions done as quietly as possible. And so parliamentary pressure is absolutely vital, as are demonstrations in front of embassies. And we've seen Bahrain react very badly to the immense pressure from civil society, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, Reprieve, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. They've all spoken out, and that is useful.
Mr. Walton, we thank you very much for your time on this. We do appreciate it. That is Sam Walton, live in London. Thank you.
No probs.